Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Emma and today we're going to be talking about all the books I read in August. It's so weird to me that we're starting to come into the last few months of the year. I feel like I've blinked and missed about 3 months. However, I had a bit of a weird reading month, but a good reading month this month. I'm excited to share all of the new things that I read with you guys. So the way this video is going to be structured is I'm going to talk about all of the books I've read under different genres so far this month, so that you guys can pick and choose what genres you want to watch, or you can watch the whole video. Please watch the whole video. This is my first time trying this sort of structure for a wrap-up video. In my last wrap-up video, my July wrap-up, I split the books into different star ratings, so I think I started with like 2-star books and worked my way up to 5 stars. So let me know which you prefer down in the comments below so I know what to do for my September wrap-up. So the genres I ended up reading from this month were children's, thriller, horror, sci-fi, contemporary/romance, and non-fiction. So I managed to cover quite a few genres in the 9 books I read this month, which I was quite proud of. I also read 2 absolutely colossal fan fictions, which I'm going to mention towards the end of the video in case you guys want to check them out. But with that all said and done, let's just get into the video. So the first children's book I read this month was Matilda, and this was definitely a Harry Styles inspired read. Obviously Harry's House came out probably a couple of months ago now, and Matilda is one of the songs that really hit me on that album, so I decided I was going to reread the book. The last time I read this book I was really young, so it was really interesting reading it from an adult's perspective. The book is about a child named Matilda who is extremely gifted, but her family don't really see this. Her family are not great, and definitely maybe a wee bit abusive, and the only people that notice that she is very gifted are her teacher at school and the local librarian. So later on in the book it's discovered that Matilda can move things with her mind, so she's not just intellectually gifted, she's like gifted. And I really enjoyed how this book mixed children's fiction with a bit of magical realism. I thought that was really well done. I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed Miss Honey. She's just such a great character, and reading her as an adult, because I think she's meant to be around my age, around 22, and she's teaching these children, was just so interesting and I really loved it. Also rereading it, I have no idea how Miss Trunchbull got away with all of the stuff she did. Like, I know it's set in like the sort of like 50s, 60s like sort of thing, but still. What I was a bit surprised about with this book though was I finally sort of picked up on the anti-Semitic messages that some people say are in Roald Dahl's writing. I reread the BFG last year and I couldn't really pick any anti-Semitism up in that reread, but there were definitely some points in here where I noticed it, so if that's something that you don't want to read, then maybe stay away from this. It definitely wasn't overpowering, it's just I was kind of looking for it because of what I'd read about Roald Dahl's work, so definitely keep that in mind if you're going to pick this one up. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars overall. The next children's book I read this month was another Roald Dahl book, and that was The Witches. Now, this was really just masochism picking this up, because this book terrified me when I was younger. I don't even think I read the book. I think I stayed away from the book, and it was the film that scarred me. You might remember some of the scenes of boys turning into rats/mice, and yeah, that terrified me as a child. But I decided I was going to read it. So this book is about a boy and his grandmother who are staying at this hotel in England, and it just so happens the same hotel that they're staying at is hosting the annual meeting for all of the witches in England, that is presided over by the Grand High Witch. And the boy and his grandmother, basically part of the plot is that they're trying to take down this group of witches. Witches in this book absolutely hate children. Their ultimate goal is to eradicate children using some very horrific methods, if I'm going to be honest. And it was still scary reading the book, and the book's ending is actually a lot more scary than the films. The witches in this book were just as scary and ruthless as I remembered from my childhood, but in Roald Dahl's descriptions of the witches in this book, there definitely was that anti-Semitic vibe as well. and possibly even a little bit of a misogynistic one. So I wasn't really all that keen on that aspect of the book, but I still did enjoy it, and it still did scar me probably just as much as it did when I was a child. I ended up giving this 3 stars overall. Now, the final children's book that I read this month was Goodnight Mr. Tom, which is a British classic children's book, but I'd never read it before, so I decided I was going to give it a go. This book is so sad. See, if you want to cry, like seriously cry, read this book. The plot of this book centres around William, who is an evacuee from London, who's sent to the countryside to live with a loner, like an old loner called Tom, or Mr. Tom as William calls him. And this book really is about childhood abuse and finding your feet and finding yourself as a child that's went through that. William's mother was an abuser, and when he moves to the country with Tom, he finds a new lease in life. Tom is really patient with him, he makes friends in the village, but it is also told in wartime, obviously, because William's an evacuee, so there's some amazing ups and downs in this book, and it's so good. What I will say though is, if you are in any way triggered at all by child abuse and religious parents, there is like a minor like suicide warning in this as well. So if those are things you're especially sensitive to, maybe this isn't for you, but I absolutely loved it. It had me sobbing and it was just amazing. So yeah, if you've not read it, definitely check it out if you think that's something you'd enjoy. So now we're moving on to the contemporary romance section of my wrap up, and this contemporary romance section should probably just be called a Colleen Hoover section. Not going to lie, the 2 books I read in this section are both Colleen Hoover books, so if she's not your thing, maybe skip ahead. So the first book I read this month from Colleen Hoover was It Ends With Us. I absolutely adored this book. Much like Goodnight Mr. Tom, which I just discussed, this book centres around abuse, but instead of it being childhood abuse, although there is a little bit of that in here as well, it is mostly domestic abuse and sexual violence, and it is tackled so well. The plot of this book focuses on the main character Lily's relationship with 2 men in her life over the course of quite a few years and how those relationships change. This book was an absolutely fantastic portrayal of domestic abuse. It really humanised, in my opinion, domestic abuse survivors, and it shows why a lot of women end up trapped in these situations and why a lot of women are sometimes reluctant to leave these situations. It did a fantastic job. Colleen Hoover also drew on her parents' own abusive relationship to write this book, and you can really see it in the writing. There's a lot of depth in here that, I'm sorry to say, I think a lot of her other books lack, but this hit me like a sucker punch. This book was easily a solid 5 stars for me. It did what it did, and it did it flawlessly. If you'd like to see my opinions on It Ends With Us, Ugly Love, which I'm just about to wrap up here, and also All Your Perfects, then check out my Colleen Hoover reading vlog where I've read all of these books for the first time. I'm also going to be doing a reading vlog of It Starts With Us, which is the sequel to It Ends With Us. That comes out in October, so if you're a Colleen Hoover fan, definitely look out for that. That will probably be up on my channel a couple of days after the book releases, because I'm going to devour that book. As I mentioned, the second Colleen Hoover book that I read this month was Ugly Love. Now, I wish I liked this book. I was so ready to like this book. This book is a brother's best friend romance trope, which is usually something I eat up. Usually that is the trope that does it for me. It ticks all of the boxes. Not even that trope could save this book for me. The entire plot of the book is basically about Tate and her relationship with her brother's best friend Miles when she moves in with her brother and he lives across the hall. They're both pilots and that's really about it. Miles has some trauma, we see a lot of that in flashbacks, but instead of constructively dealing with this trauma, and instead of Tate possibly saying like, hey, maybe you should get help for this and talk to someone, they basically just engage in a really toxic relationship where she lets Miles walk all over her and Miles projects all of his trauma onto Tate. There's quite a few points in this book where the relationship definitely bordered on emotional abuse, and yet by the end we're still meant to like Miles. So it was almost like the opposite of It Ends With Us for me. It basically took the message of strength and like feminism in It Ends With Us and just turned it on its head. Plus, I really think that Tate and Miles' relationship lacked depth. I think it was a relationship, in my opinion, that was purely sexual. And at least those scenes were good. That's really all I can say about this book. I ended up giving it 2 stars. So now to move on to the thriller/horror section. I read 1 thriller and 1 horror book this month, so I kind of amalgamated the 2 genres. So the thriller book I read this month was Anatomy of a Scandal, and I absolutely love this book. This is like a feminist thriller which just suits me perfectly. I actually picked this book up because I started watching the Netflix series and I just became absolutely obsessed with the story, and it was so good, it really didn't disappoint. The plot of this book centres around a politician whose affair goes public, and then later on his mistress accuses him of rape, and it follows his trial, and there's quite a few flashbacks and everything. It's mostly told from the point of views of his wife and also the female barrister who's prosecuting the case, and it does a fantastic job of showing how the UK justice system is stacked against victims, specifically when it's sexual crime. This book is also really gripping and fast paced. I don't really want to say a lot more about it because it's fantastic and I don't want to spoil anything, but if you like thrillers, if you like feminist vibes, definitely pick this up. Do be mindful of the trigger warnings though, because there's a very strong rape, sexual assault trigger warning on this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars in the end, which is the highest I've rated a thriller book in quite a while, so I really did enjoy this. So the horror book that I read this month is actually an LGBTQ horror, which was a really nice touch, and it is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This was such an odd book. It was so strange, but it got right under my skin and made it squirm. The plot revolves around Mary, who is a woman that works from home, and her wife Leah, who is a marine biologist who routinely goes on submarine expeditions to the bottom of the ocean to study things. It's told in a sort of dual point of view, but also a dual timeline, where we get Mary's commentary and Leah's commentary. The plot mostly centres around one of Leah's expeditions to the bottom of the ocean and why it ends up being delayed from a 6-week expedition to a 6-month expedition, and how this affects the relationship between Mary and Leah. Mary's point of view deals with Leah after she returns from the trip and how their relationship has changed, and there's quite a lot of body horror in this aspect. It basically, it can be read as a metaphor for grief, or it can be read as like a disgusting horror story, to be honest. It really just depends on how you want to read it. Leah's point of view deals with her expedition and what's went wrong with the expedition when she's at the bottom of the ocean, and it's really creepy, it's really freaky, it made my skin crawl, but it was also absolutely gorgeously written. Although I really enjoyed this book, I think it just wasn't really my thing. Like, the body horror just didn't sit well, it freaked me out. But if that is your thing, this book's like great for it. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. There was also quite a bit of commentary about the LGBT community, which I thought was really interesting in this book as well. So if you're looking for a gay horror, definitely maybe pick this one up. So now moving on to the non-fiction section. So the non-fiction book I read this month was This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. Now this is a sort of memoir non-fiction book, and it deals with Adam Kay's time as a junior doctor in the NHS in the UK. Now, for those of you that don't live in the UK, the NHS is the National Health Service, and it is the free healthcare that's offered to all UK citizens. It has been consistently underfunded and understaffed for quite a while now, and this book really sort of digs in and shows you that firsthand. Now, these are real excerpts from Adam Kay's diaries when he was a junior doctor. although some things have been switched out for data protection purposes. This book was fantastic. It was startlingly funny. It was so dark and sarcastic, but it also just showed the pure exhaustion and the pressure that NHS workers go through on the day-to-day, and it really opened my eyes to a lot of the issues that are present within the NHS. If you're at all curious about the NHS, British politics, or healthcare in general, this is definitely a good book to read. It's absolutely fantastic, and it actually made me laugh out loud quite a lot. It's very funny. Overall, I ended up giving it 4 stars. So the last book I'm going to talk about today is the sci-fi book that I read this month, and that is Contact by Carl Sagan. Now, I've been wanting to read this book for so long, and I'm so glad I finally picked it up. I really, really enjoyed it. Of this book centres around a SETI scientist who is a scientist that mans radio telescopes to look at the stars and see if there are any extraterrestrial origin signals coming back from huge parts of the sky. SETI is an actual program. It is a real scientific program which you can look up and do a bit of reading on. I'm such a geek for all of this stuff. I studied maths and physics at uni, and an interest in a lot of stuff to do with SETI and extraterrestrial life and astrophysics in general was the reason I ended up going down that path. However, this sometimes makes it really hard to enjoy sci-fi novels because I can be so critical of them because I know exactly what would work and what just wouldn't within a sort of physics standpoint. But this book was written by a physicist. It was written by Carl Sagan, and it means that so much of the science is on point. There is a point where it definitely goes very, very theoretical, and maybe a bit off kilter. But I've kind of read that part of the book more as philosophy rather than like science. To get back to the plot, because I kind of went off on a tangent there, there is a SETI scientist and she discovers an extraterrestrial signal coming from the star Vega. This causes basically a worldwide frenzy and collaboration effort between pretty much all the countries in the globe to monitor, record and decrypt the data that's being sent to them from extraterrestrials. This book's also set during the Cold War, so there's some really cool commentary on political tension and just global politics and how the world works and how that interferes and intertwines with science, which was really, really fantastic. I loved that aspect of the book. There's also some really interesting philosophical commentary in the book as well, which I think I touched upon, and it's just absolutely fantastic. I really, really loved this. I'm a sucker for this type of book the same way that I'm a sucker for like Prometheus the film. Like the whole idea of like extraterrestrials contacting us or being like the creators or something like that. Just that stuff, just I love all of that. I really, really like this book. I'd recommend it to you if you enjoy science, if you enjoy sci-fi, if you enjoy like weird politics, or if you've just always been curious as to what alien contact might actually look like, because a lot of this would be pretty accurate for what extraterrestrial first contact would probably look like. So it's just a really, really cool book, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. I absolutely adored this one. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the fan fiction I read this month. So I read 2 colossal fanfics, like god tier fanfics, like 300,000 words in length, like plus fanfics, and I'm really proud of that. So I read The Auction, which is a Dramione fanfic, and I also read Remain Nameless, which is another Dramione fanfiction. So Dramione fanfiction is a complete comfort genre to me, and because I went through a bit of a difficult time towards the end of this month, I just devoured these 2 fanfictions. So The Auction is really, really great. I think this is probably my favourite Dramione fanfiction I've read like ever, which is a bold claim. This is a sort of Voldemort wins alternate universe, and Hermione and a lot of the other girls are sold off to the Death Eaters after Voldemort wins. Draco bids on Hermione basically because he's had feelings for her in school. He wants to protect her from a lot of the other Death Eaters. So she goes to live at Malfoy Manor, and both Lucius and Narcissa Draco's parents treat her pretty well. She's given like a suite, and over the course of the book, both Narcissa and Draco, and to an extent Lucius as well, actually help her work out how to kill Voldemort, because what he's doing to a lot of the girls and what he's doing to the world is just not great. There's some really cool politics involved in this as well. It's absolutely fantastic. The Dramione is slow burn but worth it, and it's done so well. Specifically, I loved the last quite a few chapters of the fanfiction where it dealt with what happens when a regime falls and the turmoil that that causes after you've had like a coup or a war. Like how, when does your legal system get back on track? Who makes sure that your legal system's fair and just? All of that sort of stuff was just so good. And I think it was at 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10 fanfiction. It was great. If Dramione your thing, if Harry Potter fanfiction's your thing, definitely check this one out. So Remain Nameless is a fanfiction that is obviously like Harry wins, and it's set quite a few years after the war. It deals with Draco Malfoy, who is having lots and lots of mental health issues. He's been having mental health issues for a while, and he's seeing basically the wizarding equivalent of a therapist, and he goes into Muggle London cafes and has started becoming regular at this specific cafe because he likes the anonymity it gives him. And it turns out that Hermione Granger uses the same cafe. They've been going for years but at different times, and they finally bump into each other and they start up this friendship that quickly turns into more. And it's so lovely because it's so mental health positive. The plot's really good. It seems almost realistic as well, which is a weird thing to say, but it seemed like a really realistic plot, and it was just so sweet. It was slow burn, like quite slow burn, but it was definitely worth it. And if you like a sort of sweet Draco, this is definitely the fanfiction for you. So that's me wrapped up everything that I've read this month, including some big fanfictions. I hope you've enjoyed me sharing the books and the fanfictions I've read this month, and comment down below if you're going to pick one of the books up or if you've read one of the books. I'd love to know your thoughts on some of the stuff I've ended up reading. If you've enjoyed watching me wrap up these books and you've not already, possibly check out my July wrap up. I read quite a lot more in July. I read The Bloody Count of Monte Cristo in July, which is such a hefty book. So if you enjoy wrap up videos, possibly check that one out. But thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. I love you guys so much. If you're a subscriber, thank you for sticking around, and if you're not a subscriber yet, then maybe consider checking out a couple more of my videos and subscribing. I love you guys.